memory on my camcorder last week, not for this class, but for the other class. So that's why I'm going to be cutting the thing off and on from time to time during the lecture. Okay, India. When I was a child, we did not know this to be completely true, but today we do. At one time, all the continents were joined together, and they made one big supercontinent called Pangaea. Now, you can see, it's like the pieces of puzzle, how that North and South America fits into Europe and Africa here. And it's not a perfect fit, but then if you allow for the continental shelves, which is the area that extends out in the ocean a ways, it makes for a better fit. And also, Australia and Antarctica join these, but there was one unique situation. The subcontinent of India started off down here along with Australia, Antarctica, South America. And when India broke off from the rest of from Pangaea, it wound up, you might say, floating across the Indian Ocean and smacking the underbelly of Asia pretty hard and pushing up the tall Himalayan mountains. That is why the Himalayan mountains are the tallest mountains on the face of the earth. And if the fact is, we're still pushing up the mountains. And every once in a while, there'll be a big earthquake. There was one just a few years back that actually lowered one of the tall mountains by a few feet. But what the point of this is this helped separate India from the rest of the world. I mean, India is a peninsula separating the rest of the world by the ocean on two sides, triangular shape, and the third side by tall mountains. So this allowed India to develop its own unique subculture and become one of the areas of the world we're studying. Now, when you study first semester world history, you're studying like a mosaic. There's India, there's China, there's the Middle East, there's Europe, there's Africa, and there are the Americas. When you study second semester world history, they all come together. The Americas are interacting with Europe, and Africa is interacting with the Americas, and so on and so forth. But in this point in our history, these places are developing in isolation. So India then developed fairly in isolation from much of the rest of humanity, at least for centuries. Now, the original inhabitants of India, let's see, were the Dravidians. Now, the Dravidians are known to have been originally black, and we don't know where they came from, but it's like they were the indigenous people that we find there when we first bump into India. But then, around the year 1800 BCE, and let me pause here. Something I did not mention last time is that we keep time by BCE or CE. Now, in the olden days, BC meant before Christ. So if you look in an old book, you'll find 1800 BC. That meant before Christ. But now we want to include every religion, supposedly, so we now call it before the Common Era. CE is the Common Era. So in 1800 BCE, the people called the Aryans. The Aryans came down. The Aryans were an Indo-European people, and they were apparently a nomadic people. Now, there were one of four groups we know of that came down. There was the Medes, the Aryans, and of course your book shows the Aryans going through this territory here, but then moving on farther eastward and leaving the Medes and Persians behind. Then there was a group that headed to the southwest, the Greeks and the Latins, who became the Romans. So four groups. They might have been forced to move south due to climate change. Now, that climate change is, pardon the expression, a hot issue today. I must say as a historian that the climate has changed all throughout history. The temperatures have gone up and down and up and down. And at one time, the whole world had a uniform tropical climate. This is called the Cretaceous period. And if you don't believe it, look it up. I looked up that during the Cretaceous period, even Antarctica had tropical plants and animals living in it, fern trees, tropical climate. And it turns out Antarctica is the only continent where there's a river that goes from one ocean to the other and divides the continent in two. So almost two separate continents. Today, Antarctica is under 3 miles of ice, but at one time, Antarctica was hot. And it cooled back down. So what if the climate warms up? If it does, I believe it'll cool back down. Now, your climatologists are going to try to tell you, oh, it's man-made climate change. I'll be having more to say. I mean, on your syllabus, I ask you to look up about 5 or 6 things, and one of them is climate change. Again, because it's such a hot issue. Just before we get to the calendar on the syllabus, about 5 or 6 things, including climate change and, oh yeah, what happens when governments help the poor? Disaster. I want to say that while I'm pausing, helping the poor is one of the most noble acts you can do until the government does it. When the government opens its pocketbook to help the poor, the result is usually a collapse of the government and disaster. This has been true throughout history. The United States is, in today's world, is not the only people who have done it. It's been done throughout history. The Chinese tried it. The Koreans tried it. The Japanese even, with a result, collapse. All right, leaving that, okay, I digressed a little bit. All right, now here is something on race relations, and I know that's also a hot issue right now. But the Aryans, being Indo-European, were originally white. Over time, they became black. It was not because of the bright Indian sunshine darkened their skin. And it was not because something in the soil of India makes a person's skin dark. No, it was because they wound up intermarrying with a local native population. And over time, because the local native population, the Dravidians outnumbered them, they became dark. But here is why a man named Adolf Hitler, hopefully all of you heard of him. Adolf Hitler is actually a subject for second semester, but I have to digress here because Adolf Hitler was really fascinated by the Aryans. Because the Aryans claimed that they were superior and that their white skin made them better. I mean, folks, again, my apologies, I don't mean to offend, but this is standard history in which I really have to teach. Because it is standard, and it affects India all throughout its history, even today. The lighter your skin is in India in general, the higher you're regarded. Now, if you talk to a person from India today, they're going to deny, oh no, we don't do that anymore. And secretly, they still do. But underneath, they'll tell you, when they know they're talking to a Westerner, oh, that's something we used to do, but even though I've had a few people from India in my class who've been honest enough to admit that it still goes on. But the white was considered better. And generally, the upper classes are lighter skinned than the lower caste or darker skinned people. Now, as time has gone on, it's become a little bit less and less true, obviously. I mean, after all, it's been 2,800 years since the Aryans first came into India. And over that time, they've become dark like the rest of the people. Now, the difference between the dark people of India and the dark people of Africa is, the Africans have features like thick lips and that the Indians are. The Indian people have Caucasian features with dark skin. African people generally do not have Caucasian features. Again, hopefully all of you know what I mean without me going into any more detail. All right. Anyway, the Aryans came in, took over, and they set themselves up as the upper classes. Now, at one time, folk, we believed that the Aryans battled their way to the top and conquered the native Dravidians. In fact, the first time I taught this class in 2000, that's what I taught because that's what I was taught. But now your book says we really have not been able to prove. I mean, this is a good question. Did the Aryans actually fight the Dravidians? This has not been proven. Why did the Dravidians collapse? Why were they able to let the Aryans come in and take over them? These are questions we really don't know the answer to. All right. I want to point out now two Dravidian cities. Pardon me, the Dravidian civilization was called the Harappan. The Harappan civilization, again, Dravidian and Harappan, same thing. They did have writing. Here's the problem with the writing. They wrote on clay bricks, but we cannot decipher it. And again, to decipher a text, you have to have reams and reams and reams and reams and stacks of text. We have that with the case of the Sumerians. Stacks and stacks, and we were able to decipher the Sumerian text. We cannot read the Harappan text, owing to the fact that there are not enough of them. All right. Now, there were two Harappan cities. These cities were actually, there were a bunch of Harappan cities. The Harappan civilization was on the Indus Valley. Now, it's in what is today Pakistan, but at one time Pakistan was a part of India. It's along the Indus River. So it's sometimes called the Indus Valley Civilization. That's where in India, the word Indus River is named after India, even though today the Indus River is in Pakistan. Now, why did the Harappan civilization collapse? Well, if you look at two of their cities, the two cities, actually again there were several, Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. Mohenjo-Daro, now this is the one I really want you to pay attention to. About 3 years or so ago, I had two classes where I picked a topic, told me to write a 1,500-word paper on Mohenjo-Daro. Actually, 1,000-word, 4 pages on Mohenjo-Daro. I never did that again because I did not like the conclusions that half of them drew. The city of Mohenjo-Daro is called the city of the dead. It was a city that was forgotten about, and then some people moved in and bumped into it. There are persons who have said, the city of Mohenjo-Daro was discovered in 1920, before the first nuclear blast. There are persons who say that the city of Mohenjo-Daro was destroyed in a nuclear holocaust. Just like I talked about the city of Ur. Now, I know if some of you, when one of you is like opening, I don't know if you open your mouth in surprise or you're just yawning, but whatever. You're going to say, oh no, the atomic bomb was not invented until 1945. There is quite a bit of evidence, folks, that nuclear weaponry was actually used several times in the ancient world. There are persons who will say that the city of Mohenjo-Daro has a high level of radioactivity. Now here's something that you really find in the city that's unique. Virtually no bodies. About 42 bodies have been found unburied. That when they died instantly, suddenly, and one body is the body of a female trying to cover up the body of apparently her child, indicating that they knew that they were suffering destruction and had time to at least hide or crouch before the end came. Now, a city of 100,000 people, why would you only find 40-some bodies? Well, if you read Indian literature, they'll tell you that the city was warned, and most of the inhabitants fled, but some insisted on staying. It's like Pompeii, when the volcano erupted, some of the people there insist on staying. And like the big volcano that's going on in Hawaii right now, there's some people who just don't want to leave. Or like when we have a hurricane and the weathermen say, hey, evacuate. And I told my family, if one comes our way, we're going to evacuate. Get out of there. Well, I don't want to leave behind my stuff. Get out anyway. But anyway, about 40 or so persons apparently decided not to leave when the destruction came. Now, there is something there. I mean, if you look it up, some people say that the city was destroyed in a flood. If it were, there'd be thousands upon thousands of bodies. The flood, because the floods come further southern. Oh yeah, the bodies were lying, some on the street. They were not buried. You don't bury people on the street. And then they were covered over with 3,000 years worth of dust before they were found. So by clearing away a little bit of dust, you could find the skeletons. Again, if you're interested, do the research yourself. There is an area that's believed by some to be the blast area. And then the blast area, then the rest of the buildings remain untouched. I mean, they're about like untouched. But if you know anything, again, what I think would have killed the people would be not just the blast, but the microwave radiation that came after. All right. Anybody have any comments, questions? I did have one girl ask several years ago, is this about the same time of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah? In the case of Abraham came from and got out of the city of And then, shortly after he got out, came the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and some people, including a man named Zechariah Sitchin, who's now deceased. Zechariah Sitchin believed that the war started around and then spread eastward. Pardon me, the war started around Sodom and spread eastward toward and then kept on spreading eastward toward Mohenjo-Daro. In other words, basically, here's here's Sodom. Well, here's Sodom along the Dead Sea. Here's and here's Mohenjo-Daro. The three cities form a line, and they were destroyed at the same time in what appears some to be a nuclear holocaust. Each of you can decide if you're somebody who believes there's, again, if you want, there's enough evidence to believe what your preconceived ideas will let you believe. If you have preconceived ideas that early man was primitive and that they, okay. Well, just about 2 days ago, I was reading an article about how the Great Pyramids were built, and said it's remarkable they had not even yet invented the wheel. I found out just quick reading. They didn't even have the wheel. Something else, they didn't even leave a trail. They didn't have, had not yet even invented the rope, had not yet invented the pulley, and yet they could move these rocks as a builder bash, basically, fiddlesticks. These people were more advanced than we are. We have learned that we can't move these stones, much less move them without a wheel, without. I think they flew the rocks over, which is why there's no trail. And I think they were using technology we don't have now. All right, I'm not through. Right. Anyway, Mohenjo-Daro, city of the dead. We don't know what it was originally called. Anyway, this might explain how the Aryans could move in folk and just take over without even drawing their swords. I've mentioned before how that civilized people will have uncivilized people living on the fringes. And every once in a while, the uncivilized will just move in and quietly take over. This has happened time and time and time again throughout history. The Amorites took over the Sumerians, as one example. And then the Aryans, nomadic people, took over India. The nomadic Persians took over what is today Iran. So on and so forth. And then the nomadic Greeks took over what was once the Aegean civilization. And the Latins took over what was once the Etruscan civilization. Time and time again, the civilized people fall prey to the uncivilized, who greatly outnumber them, for one thing. This is another example. All right. Now, Yes.
You said the Mohenjo-daro is both the city forgotten about and city of the dead?
The word Mohenjo-daro is a modern word, because we don't know what it was at that time. So we have to have a name for it so people know what to talk. So we call it today Mohenjo-daro. That was not its name at that time, apparently. I mean, we're pretty sure of that. It was not its name at the time. All right, now, eventually, again, of all the world's religions, some of them had a founder, but eventually the Indian people developed a religion called Hinduism. Now, the word Hindu, to our Western minds, conjures up a religion, and it is. It's a religion, but it also means anything that has to do with India. That's not just their culture, their social classes, or what other social structure. Anything that has to do with India comes under the heading of Hindu. But we in the West, when we think of Hindu, we mostly think of their religion. Hinduism has no known founder, and it apparently evolved over time. But Hinduism has sacred books, 4 sacred books called the Vedas. And I was embarrassed. When I first started teaching, I pronounced this word Vedas, and I had one of my pupils correct me on it. Yeah, I believe the correct pronunciation is Veda. The earliest of the 4 Vedas, all right, actually there were 4. The earliest is called the Rig Veda. I've written this in cursive because it's a foreign word. Now, again, hold on to your seats. Be prepared to take a ride. The Rig Veda contains references to travel to other planets. The Rig Veda talks about a white horse that can gallop among the stars and could carry people to nearby stars, even maybe more distant stars. Believe what you want to. I mean, again, there have been persons living in the West who think the Bible was far out. If you think the Bible was far out, wait till you read the writings of the Sumerians. Wait till you read the Vedas. They're even farther out. And the Rig Veda mentions a city in that part of the world, and then you're being blown up by the same force that drives the sun. In other words, a nuclear holocaust. The flash of light was even brighter than the sun. That's because it was closer to him. He was here on Earth. But it was so bright it blinded anyone who would have seen it. And it destroyed one of the cities. The people living there were warned to get away, and most of them got away. A few decided to remain behind. Now, folk, if you don't believe that the city of Mohenjo-daro was destroyed in a nuclear holocaust, you have to explain why when the Holocaust was over, nobody came back in. Now, typically, when a city is destroyed by a flood, or even by a fire, when the flood is over with, which it will be in a day or two, the survivors will come back in. When the hurricane is over with, or the monsoon, the survivors will come back in. But when a nuclear blast occurs, the survivors don't come back in.
The meteorite?
I'm glad I've had more than one person say the same thing. The problem I have with a meteorite, it appears that the hole that made the blast was somewhat targeted. Now, the chances of a meteorite hitting a highly inhabited area of the Earth are extremely slim. Now, we had a meteorite hit Russia, one in 1908, and another one around 2018, 100 years later. And the one in 1908 hit an uninhabited area of the world, here in Siberia. The one in 2018 hit a somewhat, but it didn't kill anybody. There has only been, in all recorded history, one person who was killed by a meteorite. That's the documented. He was out, walking along, and all of a sudden the meteorite hit him from the sky.
Lucky person.
By himself. By himself. He was walking by himself.
He was just walking. Well, I don't know if he was walking by himself or what, but a meteorite hit him, and that's the only time in history. Now, the thing about this, it appears to have been targeted. In other words, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were not destroyed by meteorites. They were targeted. Something else too. When we dropped bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we found mounds of salt. This sounds gross, but sorry about it. The mounds of salt turned out to be what was left of humanity after everything else had been blown away by the extreme high heat. What was left of the mound of salt? And the Bible mentions that Lot's wife lagged behind, did not travel fast enough from the city of Sodom, and she turned into a mound of salt. We find a lot of mounds of salt around the city where we think Sodom and Gomorrah were. We find salt mounds also in the area of Mohenjo-Daro and a few other places on earth. There is a place here in the desert where the sand is turned to glass. That does not happen with an ordinary fire at ordinary temperatures. All right. I'll leave that. At least it looks like I've got most of you awake and listening, which is maybe what I'm supposed to do. Folk, I do believe strongly that our ancient ancestors were far more advanced than we give them credit for. Far more. The existence of the pyramids is proof of it. And if you really want to believe, there's enough evidence to believe that they did possess nuclear weaponry, and this might have been why they went from being a high civilized people capable of moving 60-ton stones to a primitive people who had lost all their technology. How close are we to having the same thing happen to us? Are any of you aware that if the right solar flare hits us, all of our solid state devices become inoperative? How many of you heard this? That means, folks, that all of our communication we've had comes to an end, except for the old-fashioned vacuum tube type. Some of you might not even know what a vacuum tube is. Vacuum tube stuff would still work. I do have one vacuum tube radio at home. I haven't turned it on in years. Don't know if it still works or not. Or our enemies could set off the same type of blast and not kill anybody, just wipe out our solid state stuff in an instant. And all of our communications are lost. Again, we have to explain, folk, why these civilizations fell, and you have to explain some things that are just not explainable. All right, I'll move on. Now, eventually India developed the Hindu religion. The Hindu religion came to represent about 3 or 4 things that are somewhat unique to the people of India. One of them is the caste system. The Rig Veda is the first book. There are 4 Vedas. And the Vedas contain, like the Bible, they contain history, they contain poetry, and they contain rules and laws. And they're the foundation for the Hindu religion. And one feature of the Hindu religion is the caste system. Your book mentions 5 castes. Now, the upper caste being the priestly caste, priest, then come the ruling caste, and then come the warrior caste. Then their 4th is the merchant caste, and then finally at the bottom are the untouchables, the pariahs. I want to write that one down. All right, the top, priest, rulers. This is not only the kings, but the nobles. Then the warriors. Then the merchants. Now, some people believe that one of the reasons that India did not develop technologically like the West did was they looked down on their merchants. The Chinese did the same thing. that the merchants were the filthy, greedy, low-down lives. Now, that's not me saying it, you understand? In the West, merchants were valued really highly. Why is merchants so important? Well, I mean, what about there, like that camcorder? I thought I had turned that thing off. Well, I'm gonna ignore it. All right, anyway, or my cell phone. There's no one place on earth that has the material needed to build something like that. To build something like that, you have